Welcome back to the Done Deal Show. Today sponsored by our friends at Match Bingo. Download and get 10 free cards per month until the end of the season right now. Scan the QR code above my bonce above my head or click on the link below. I'm joined as ever Wednesday morning during the transfer window by the brilliant Ben Jacobs. How are you, mate?
Good morning. Braving the storm. I'm in Edinburgh at the moment, and we've just been out for a little dog walk, and I nearly got blown over, but I survived to tell the tale and therefore talk about the last week or so of the transfer window.
Absolutely. And if it's going to heat up, it's got to do it now. And there's loads to delve into and loads of questions to ask today. Viewers, if you have any questions while we're live, any transfer stories that you're hearing about, read about, confused about, feel free to ask Ben. And Ben will, as ever, answer them as honestly as he can. If he knows nothing, he'll tell you. That's not one I'm familiar with. So, Terry, yeah, I am sounding a bit groggy. I'm all good, though. It's all good. All it really was, I just took a mouthful of tea and it kind of went down the wrong hole. But yeah, thanks for pointing that out, Twisted. So I wanted to start with Man United, actually, because we have seen the appointment of the new CEO this week, a little bit of a coup, taking him from Manchester City. At the same time, there are now talks about Zerbi coming in, exits this January of the likes potentially of AWB, talks of Choupo-Moting coming in. What's your latest understanding of the situation at board level at Man United, and could that have any impact on players in and out in the next 7 days?
Well, I think, first of all, there's this agreed transfers plan that INEOS are familiar with. And in that, there's not a bunch of planned business. So we're into that opportunistic week, whereby if Manchester United find an opportunity that is cheap or they get an outgoing, then of course they may bring in somebody. And I think Eric Choupo-Moting is an interesting profile who perhaps is right for Manchester United now and clearly not during the summer. And Manchester United have historically done this, haven't they? Where they found an older profile with experience. He scored 17 goals in all competitions last season. So the interest is concrete, but it can very quickly go away if it's not done this window, because by the time you get to the summer, different targets are going to materialize. So that's an example of where if Bayern can be persuaded and the finances add up, the player is open. And I say if, because even with Harry Kane arriving, Bayern really feel that he's still valuable as a squad player. So it's not an easy deal to get done, and nothing has advanced at the moment, but you won't be shocked to learn with only a week or so of the window remaining, it can move very quickly. It can move whilst we're talking. It can move by this afternoon. But as of right now, there's nothing advanced. But Manchester United could look for that kind of profile. And again, if it doesn't happen, it will disappear very quickly, because they're not going to sign a 34/35-year-old into the summer. INEOS will have their own plans for the summer, and people want to know what the targets are. But again, it doesn't work that way. You don't go targets first. You build your recruitment team. And after the strategic review has been completed, then you start to work with Ten Hag or assess Ten Hag, and should he be replaced, a new manager, and establish your targets. So the window planning will happen February, March, April. And Omar Berrada, the incoming CEO, will be kept abreast of that. I should point out that he can't start until the summer, as I revealed a couple of days ago, and that is essentially due to a gardening leave. And it is a really big appointment for Manchester United. And it shows that they're not necessarily going to focus first and foremost on fixing the imminent. They're not going to paper over the cracks. They're not going to put it on the manager necessarily. They're not going to try and do a one signing fixes all. What they're going to try and do is build a structure. And the CEO is a big part of that. And next up, it will be the recruitment team. And then I think we can talk more concretely about potential summer signings. But Berrada was being groomed over time to eventually be the Manchester City CEO. He's amicable. He's got strong football and commercial knowledge. He'll sit well and bridge that gap between Sir Jim Ratcliffe and the Glazers. He'll report to both Ratcliffe and also the Glazers, Joel Glazer specifically. And I think that the fact Manchester City are so sad to see him go and see it as a compliment to their model and perhaps how far ahead they are at a foundational level comparative to Manchester United, the fact they view it as inevitable that certain names will be poached, shows still the pull of Manchester United, but also that INEOS have made an instant impact, because I don't think this is a CEO. If you just said to the Glazers 6 months ago, go and find one, I'm not sure that they would have, one, shortlisted him, or two, been able to get him. So even though it's billed as a joint appointment, this was INEOS driven, but because INEOS are not formally in, technically all they can do is consult and recommend. But the first approach was INEOS, the first interview was INEOS, the recommendation to the Glazers was INEOS, and now it's kind of got flipped, because legally and formally, it's still the Glazers and Manchester United that have to say, okay, we're going to do your interview. We're going to now do your paperwork. We're going to offer you the job, because INEOS are not in a legal position to do that. But it's a really big coup, and it's different because it, again, as I said to you a moment ago, shows Manchester United are thinking strategically first, which immediately shows it will be a new model.
And to interject, I apologize. For me as a United fan, I know we've had these conversations on air and privately over the last couple of years since we've worked together. This is everything I've been asking for. I'm actually, for the first transfer window in a long while, I'm actually not even concerned to a degree with who we're bringing in and who we're letting go. Just bringing in or getting the deal done for Omar, looking at the likes of Dan Ashworth, looking at the likes of Paul Mitchell, and kind of getting that kind of triangle of CEO, sporting director, head of recruitment in, creating a plan, a philosophy, and setting the standards at the club. All of that needs to happen before we even think about splashing serious money on players. And I love the phrase you used. Man United right now, and maybe for the first time in a decade, are not trying to paper over cracks. They're trying to fix those problems, solidify those foundations, and then build upon it. And I can't express enough to Man United fans watching, and to rivals if they want to hear it. This gives me so much hope about the future already. Now, of course, as a United fan, I'm going to keep my foot firmly on the neck of the owners, keep pushing those standards, keep asking for more. But I think it's a fantastic start, even considering that INEOS had not even been ratified yet. I think it's a fantastic start from looking sort of outwards in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that when you know they can get him, it sort of gives fans confidence that they'll get other big appointments. So on the recruitment side, my understanding remains that Dan Ashworth is high on the list of priorities. And there could be real opportunism, because he says he's happy at Newcastle, and that's true to my understanding. But Newcastle as a project could take a step backwards and almost be victims of their own success, in the sense that financially speaking, when you qualify that quickly for Champions League, having been previously in a relegation battle, it's quite hard for your finances to catch up with your success. So now we see that Newcastle may have to let some players go in the next two windows. And if they don't qualify for Champions League over the summer, then Dan Ashworth's job is a whole lot harder, because the wheeling and dealing is more framed around balancing the books than necessarily getting the players that he wants. And conversely, if INEOS come and say, we have issues also with financial fair play, but we feel that we can free up the following funds, and we feel that you can build a new recruitment team, and Manchester United's obviously a big club. So is Newcastle, by the way, but he might be lured by the history of Manchester United and the legacy that he can create there. Maybe Ashworth will feel like he built Newcastle effectively from joining Brighton to that club, and then got them under the new ownership into Champions League. And if there's a sense that everything is going to be slower in the next season or two, depending on what happens at Newcastle and depending on where they finish, then I would expect INEOS to play upon that, and the fact that he has a pre-existing relationship with Sir Dave Brailsford, who he's very close friends with. The other thing I wanted to say is that it won't just be one, as I'm told. It might be a Dan Ashworth sporting director type figure. There'll be other candidates as well. Berta is under consideration. And we know Paul Mitchell as well. And Mitchell, I've said many times, is caught between two roles. He's probably too experienced to be a technical director, and he's probably not quite experienced enough in the Premier League to be a sporting director. So the titles are not that important, but it's very possible that Dan Ashworth, hypothetically, or somebody like a Julian Ward or Berta get a sporting director consideration, and then a Mitchell and a Dougie Freeman get a kind of head of recruitment type role, and they work together. So I think they'll go for two senior figures. We've seen reports in Italy that there is a move for Mitchell from Roma. That's not my understanding, even though it's very widespread in terms of the interest, and even some saying likely that he'll walk into that club. That's not my understanding. My understanding is that Mitchell's a free agent, that Roma's not going to happen, and that he would like a Premier League job. So I think that's the next step for Manchester United. It could be an Ashworth or someone equivalent at sporting director, but I still think there's room for a Paul Mitchell to take the second most senior role within the day-to-day recruitment team. Of course, he'd like to be considered for sporting director as well. It can't be discounted, but the only reason I raise that point about Mitchell, even though he's highly rated, is just because I know from sources with Chelsea, I know from sources with one or two other clubs, after he left Monaco, when they've looked at Mitchell, they like him, but they're just not sure whether CV-wise and experience-wise, he's quite there to lead the club as opposed to take on that secondary role. And this is why I think that Manchester United might be able to have their cake and eat it. They might be able to move for an Ashworth and move for a Mitchell. And then if you add Berrada and a couple of other hires over the course of the next 6 months to year, they're going to look like a completely different club from a model perspective and a hierarchy perspective.
Of course. And one of our viewers here that we call Maradon the Moron, he says, so with all these roles, who's in charge? Laughing. Well, the CEO is in charge, literally by being the chief executive officer. But this is how business works, Maradon. You have the CEO that's in charge. But every great leader, this is what you're meant to do. If you employ someone to be head of your recruitment, they're in charge and have a lot of control and power over the recruitment. You don't employ people to tell them what to do per se. You employ people to work on departments of your organization. So they will all have elements of the club that they are in charge of, but they will feed into the CEO, who will be ultimately responsible. Same as every single business on planet Earth, my friend. So it's crazy to me that you asked that question. It's almost like Maradon. I know you're a Liverpool fan, I think, and I know you're a bit scared right now that United could be building something special, but you're acting like having a sporting director, having a CEO, having a head of recruitment is a negative thing for Man United, when in fact, not having those things for 10 years has literally been the negative thing. So Maradon the Moron has just done himself there. But
I think as well, Terry, just to briefly add, it's not just about external and structure. And naturally, you need lots of names at a big club if you're going to succeed, and it has to be collaborative. You can't just pin it on one. The other thing is internally, and this is the point that people forget. Manchester United have gone so long with every department, not just the fan base and the Glazers, but every internal department at Manchester United on a day-to-day level, not necessarily having a connection with the Glazers. So imagine the difference when Brailsford and Ratcliffe and Blanc walk in and shake hands with every department and speak to people, whether they're at the top of the department, the middle of the department, the bottom of the department, and up and coming. They speak to people, they're visible, they're seen, they're transparent. And this is before they've even come in. That makes a massive difference, because you suddenly feel like, wait a minute, under this ownership, I might actually be motivated. I might actually be able to speak to the people above me. I might actually know what the owners are thinking. There might actually be a connection between the top of the club, the middle of the club, and the bottom of the club. And that galvanizes people, but it also forces them to up their game, because it's a paradox at the moment at Manchester United. On the one hand, everyone's really quite excited for the reasons I've just mentioned, because there's actually a connection from day one being built from the INEOS side. But at the same time, the irony is they're being forced to show their worth, because INEOS also think the club is overstaffed. They think the club doesn't run effectively, and the strategic review may have a shake-up. So every department needs to show their best face. So this is great for Manchester United, because you've got some people thinking they're buzzing to be working with Sir Jim Ratcliffe. You've got other people thinking we better up our game, otherwise Sir Jim Ratcliffe won't want to work with us.
Yeah, of course. And a few people are saying, well, Fergie did it single-handed. He didn't. He did it with the likes of David Gill. And a possible power struggle? No. Again, I think you're looking for negatives here. All the other clubs that have these structures are not having these power struggles. And this is why it's important to start as you mean to go on. Clear directive roles, and I'm quite excited about it. In terms of exits this month, just onto some players here, Ben. There's talk of Aaron Wan-Bissaka potentially leaving. What is your understanding of the likelihood of that, of him joining a club in Saudi?
Well, it's Al Nassr, the club that rightly has been linked, and the interest is genuine. They've also tried for Emerson Royal as well. And I think that both are very difficult in the next 7 days or so. So with Emerson Royal just moving away from Manchester United, there was a 20 million bid rejected. And the feeling is that Al Nassr might come back, but the player's happy and is playing well under Ange Postecoglou. Wan-Bissaka is a little bit different because in the summer, I think an exit is possible. But now the indication from Manchester United is that they don't want to let him go. So that's going to be very difficult. And I think the move to Wan-Bissaka is an indication that Al Nassr are going to be ambitious in the next 7 days, but nothing is guaranteed there. I think that John Murtagh realised this. He went to Saudi Arabia around the Club World Cup and held introductory meetings to build relationships, because you have to do that in Saudi Arabia. You can't just offer a bunch of players, even as Manchester United, if you don't take the FaceTime. And Murtagh realised that very quickly. And when he had those meetings with a view to the likes of potentially Casemiro, certainly Anthony at the time, pre-loan, Jadon Sancho, when Manchester United was still flashing around this number of 50 million obligation, Wan-Bissaka and others, the clear indication to Manchester United was essentially, we're not going to be like Manchester United. And I make that point because there's a wrong assumption that in Saudi Arabia, you can add a tax and you can offload to them. Yeah. But actually, when you look at the fees, there's exceptions. Ruben Neves, Wolves got excellent money, but there was huge outrage around Chelsea's deals, around Alan St. Maximan. And when you see the final fee, despite some exaggeration in the media, it's much, much lower. So Manchester United's issue is that they've always somehow fallen victim to being taxed. Manchester United want a player, Rasmus Højlund. They don't want to pay more than 65 million euros. They pay 90 million euros. Manchester United tax. And INEOS know this. They know they've overpaid for players, whether they've succeeded or failed. So I think Murtagh went to Saudi Arabia a bit naively, to be perfectly honest with you, from what I'm told on the Saudi side anyway. And he thought that representing Manchester United, he would be able to very easily facilitate outgoings without much FaceTime and at good prices. And then I think when he spoke to those at the ministry coordinating the deals, it was very clear that they're not stupid and it's the same people doing all of the big deals. And they're not just going to chuck a bunch of mid-season cash. And he went back, I think, with a bit of contrition, having learned that it's a slower burning process. So maybe Wan-Bissaka and the Al Nassr interest comes from the fact that he took the time to create those face-to-face relationships. But I still think that that one is more likely to be resolved in the summer rather than in the next 7 days.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense to me. Sticking with business in Saudi, there's been a lot of crying and a lot of calls for foul play with the latest dealing involving Newcastle, with the potential of a £30 million sale of Almirón. We know the deal could potentially happen. A number of Newcastle players could leave, but there's a lot of Premier League rivals that see this as Newcastle using their connections in Saudi Arabia to circumvent profit and sustainability regulations. What's your understanding of the deal? And of course, those claims being made by rivals, Ben?
Well, it's ridiculous to say that this is Newcastle somehow circumventing financial fair play, especially when you consider that the club interested in Miguel Almirón at the moment anyway is not PIF controlled. So this isn't PIF dealing with PIF. This is ultimately Al-Shabab and funding from the Ministry of Sport dealing with Newcastle. If you want to be really tenuous, you could say that PIF are government related, although Newcastle fans will shout into their laptops and say, but there's a legally binding separation. So if we are to go with that, then there isn't the government influence of Newcastle, but there is the government and Ministry of Sport influence over the Saudi Pro League. But this is not PIF negotiating with PIF, because Al-Shabab are not one of the PIF-controlled clubs. However, they are ambitious. And unlike a lot of the Saudi clubs that have spent their seasonal budget, and also many of them have got full quotas, Al-Shabab have kind of got a unexpected silver lining from a summer of upheaval where they had political issues and board upheaval, and it stopped them signing players. And the knock-on effect of that is that they've still got budget now for January, unlike some of the other Saudi clubs. And that is why they're interested. But they're also 11th in the Saudi Pro League. and they've only got an interim manager. So that might be a factor putting off Miguel Almirón. But the situation is this. As I exclusively reported, the Al-Shabab interest is genuine, and Al-Shabab have reached a verbal agreement with Newcastle United. They've been working through intermediaries as well for something all in the region of 30 million euros, I'm told, rather than the reported 30 million pounds. So not astronomical, but it would be good money for Newcastle. And I think Newcastle's acceptance is more around the finances than wanting to lose Almirón, because they're aware that someone's got to go. And they know they don't want to lose Kieran Trippier despite Bayern's interest. And they know they don't want to lose Callum Wilson. And nothing has materialised with Atleti there because they can't afford his wages anyway. So Almirón might be the one that, against their football wishes, Newcastle have to consider a sale for. It might be Saudi Arabia, it might be elsewhere, but there's definitely a deal to be done in the next week or so in the window for Miguel Almirón. I'm positive of that. So there is this verbal agreement. The actual number is not as high as people are speculating, nor is it being negotiated by anyone connected to PIF within Saudi Arabia. But the challenge in all of this, as I've reported multiple times now, is that, and it's very normal with a Saudi deal, they've gone to the club to work out the finances, and now they've got to go to the player, which means you put in all that hard work, use the leverage of the fact that maybe Newcastle do want to sell. But if Almirón says, I'm not interested, then it's game over. And there's still no clear indication that Almirón will commit to this move. And as a result, we now need to wait and see, because it's all very well having a verbal agreement, but it doesn't become a formal agreement and finalised if you then go to the player and he's not remotely interested about moving to the 11th place club in the Saudi Pro League.
Yeah, I totally get where you're coming from. And I think that the claims of like fraud and cheating are so outrageous, because we saw this from some real famous ex-pros and pundits who in the summer called into question Newcastle's dealings, but then said nothing about their former club suddenly selling two players for decent amounts of money to the same league as an example. And I've seen Man United fans crying about it. But if we suddenly got rid of 2 or 3 members of our Deadwood Society and raised 78 odd million, if we're selling it to Saudi clubs, everybody would be celebrating. So I think the way people are trying to put 2 and 2 together and they're getting 37 with Newcastle was wrong. You mentioned Trippier. As someone looking on the outside in, it seems a bit of a confusing one, because it appears the player wants to go, Bayern want him. Some reports I'm reading suggest Newcastle were open to it. Others are saying they're rejecting the notion and they don't want to let Kieran Trippier go this month. What's your understanding of that situation? And do you think Bayern Munich will get their man?
Well, I think the conflicting reports are down to the fact that Newcastle's heart says, no way we're selling Trippier, and their head, thinking about finances, might have to entertain an offer. But at the moment, the Newcastle position is firm, not for sale. They've rejected 2 bids. We wait and see whether Bayern return. The point I made yesterday was that Bayern were looking at 15 million euros. And I said that before a single bid was placed. The second bid was 15 million euros. So you're now at the top end of what Bayern would ideally like to pay. So it's all very well having some player buy in and feeling like eventually Newcastle might cede. And those of that belief will look at the Harry Kane saga and say it's got the same vibe. Spurs said they'd automatically reject bids. They said Harry Kane wasn't for sale. Eventually they sold him. And given Newcastle's financial situation, maybe Bayern feel if they really pushed and added another 5 million or 10 million, they'd get a deal done. But they're right at the top end of their valuation. So I think that Newcastle's position is maybe a bit more genuine than Spurs was with Kane. And if we're to believe the club position, they'll reject everything. So should Bayern bid again, and it's still an if, I think it will be the last bid. Not only because time is running out in the window, although 7 days as far as bids are concerned is plenty of time. You could make 7, 8, 9, 10 bids in this timescale. But I feel like Bayern's third bid, should they make one, will be their last, because they're already at that top end valuation. And I think that Newcastle are not giving any encouragement yet. They're not negotiating, they're not countering, which means that if the club position is to be believed, then Trippier won't be sold during this window. And I think, again, if they can get Almirón out, then they've got no reason to sell Trippier, because they've got the money in that they need. The other thing about Trippier is that if it was a midfielder, you would say providing you're prepared to let them go, you would replace like for like. But the challenge for Newcastle is if they bring in 15 million, it's not a lot of money by Premier League standards. So it either balances the books and you don't get a replacement because you need the money, or you spend some of the money on a replacement, most likely a loan, because 15 million euros might allow you to get a loan with an option to buy and still pocket 7, 8, 9, 10 million, depending on what the loan fee is. But if it was a midfielder, you'd go like for like, because Newcastle want a midfielder, because Tonali is obviously banned. And if you lost another midfielder, you'd replace with a midfielder. It's natural. But if you let Trippier go, you've got Livramento, who's been outstanding, by the way, but is obviously younger and still developing. And I think Newcastle would feel like they're thin. And then I think they'd feel that they might need to go and get a right back in the market. And suddenly you're in exactly the same position, because you've not necessarily made any money from the Trippier deal. You've just let him go for 15 million, and you might have to spend close to 15 million euros to find some kind of replacement. And you're back where you started. So Newcastle would have to, 1, be prepared to sell Trippier. They say they're not. 2, get enough money for Trippier. They've rejected 2 bids so far. And 3, probably still feel like they'd be able to find a replacement. And all of that in 7 days, which is why I think it's going to be a really difficult deal for Bayern to pull off, even though there is some player buy-in. And when reports say there's player buy-in, we also need to be clear. This is not Moises Caicedo player buy-in, where he's packing up his locker and waiting for the move. This is not Wilfred Gnonto type buy-in, where he's going to put in a transfer request like last summer. This is Trippier saying, I'd like the move if you agree something, but I'm not going to force the move, and I will respect the club's decision.
And it's not even the guarantee this year of winning the league title over there, with the way Bayern Leverkusen are playing right now. They're absolutely flying. There's an interesting comment that came through here when talking about Liverpool, Saudi, Newcastle, Saudi. First of all, Theo says, stupid comment. Henderson and Fabinho fees weren't that high. Well, Newcastle last summer made 27 million euros through the sale of players to Saudi. Liverpool made over 60 million. So more than double the amount of money Liverpool raised for their sales of players to Saudi versus Newcastle. And then you say a very weird thing here, Theo. You say the Liverpool owners are American, whereas Newcastle's were bought by the Saudis. It's completely different. So deep what you're saying. If you're American, you can deal with Saudis, but if you're Saudi Arabian, you cannot do deals with other Saudi Arabians. So firstly, your first statement's wrong. You raised a lot more money from Saudi than Newcastle did in the summer. And 2, you're telling me that Saudis can only... So you're also stating there that Liverpool can't do business with a club who have also got American owners. Are you happy to advocate that same message? It's absolutely crazy, bruv. Just accept that Liverpool raised money from Saudi Arabia as well. Deal with it, my bro. Deal with it. Sort of staying with Saudi, and a big story that won't go away is Karim Benzema. We know Arsenal are linked. We know Chelsea are linked. He's joined the pre-season sort of training, we're led to believe. But the reports all came out yesterday, Ben, that Benzema wants to leave at the very least on a short-term option. He's having those conversations. What's your understanding of the current situation? And have any moves been made? Have any offers been made in either direction between the likes of Chelsea, Arsenal, and Benzema, as far as you are aware?
No, not yet, and not directly to Al-Ittihad. It will all be like Henderson. It will be on the player side. I think if something was lined up, then it would be likely that Benzema, much like Henderson did, would go to the club with something concrete and then see if anything was possible. So there's a meeting due today with Ramon Planes, who's the new sporting director at Al-Ittihad. And that is, as I understand it, a second meeting. In the first meeting, it was indicated by Benzema that he'd be prepared to explore a loan. And that could even be within Saudi Arabia, but obviously Benzema's preference would be to leave and then come back during the summer. The Benzema camp deny that any exit is on the cards or that he's asked to leave via a transfer request. And that may be true in a formal sense, but it has been communicated by Benzema that if the right opportunity comes, he would like to explore it. So it's a little bit softer than saying he wants out. And I think part of that is just that it is short-termist, because he's thinking about between now and the summer. And then come summer, he may have the opportunity to help with recruitment and work with Plan S, and Al Ittihad might be in a different position. But at the moment, they're pretty close to mid-table. They're not going to defend their title, and they might not even get AFC Champions League for next season. So you can understand why Benzema, probably a bit like Henderson, feels like there's not too much to play for in the second half of the season now that the Club World Cup has passed. And that's why he's perhaps looking at other options. So it's a difficult situation. It's a tense situation. But to get out of Al Ittihad, Benzema needs a green light from Planos and Gallardo, his sporting director and his manager, from PIF, who control the club, and from the Ministry of Sport. And I'm still told there's major reluctance from the Ministry of Sport and from senior PIF figures to let Benzema go. And was he to go, they would only want him on loan within Saudi Arabia, because the optics of him going, of Henderson going, of Jota going, and potentially others are not what the wider league is looking for at this stage. And if Benzema goes, how do you know that Kante won't want to go during the summer and others? So it could be a little bit problematic. And this is why there is resistance. With Lyon, the interest is concrete. John Textor has been very vocal in trying to bring him back to Lyon, but it would require this humongous pay cut. So it's all very well saying it. And again, we need to take that with a pinch of salt, because there's great optics for Lyon, who have struggled this season, about saying, we're going to bring Benzema back. But can you actually bring Benzema back? Or is there just a desire to do so? And does that build hype? And does that help get a very angry fan base back on side? Because Lyon are in the relegation zone in Ligue 1 at the moment. I think they've only won 4 games all season. So they're suddenly going to be able to bring Benzema back on something in the region of 2 million a week, euros. It's impossible unless he basically takes a 90% pay cut or something insane. And by the way, Al Ittihad are not going to pay any wages. They're not going to make any helpful effort to anybody. So it's only about whether someone can afford Benzema, or whether Benzema's prepared to reduce his contract and then still return to Al Ittihad in the summer period. So I suppose we can term the Lyon interest concrete, but it's really, really difficult. With the Premier League, the Arsenal approach was non-existent. So you can link him if you like, but there has been no discussions in Arsenal about Benzema. There's been no approach by Arsenal for Benzema at the time we're recording. If that changes, I'll let you know, but there's nothing right now between Arsenal and Benzema. So are they going to look for a stopgap striker with experience, and is he the right fit? Of course, you can make that argument, but there's nothing at this point. The links have been downplayed between Benzema and Manchester United as well, but INEOS may input to that. And again, Manchester United can't afford Benzema in terms of wages at this point. But people are sort of jumping to a conclusion before there's actually been a conversation. With Chelsea, I would say anything is possible, because they're prone to surprising us. There's been no approach by Chelsea either to Al Ittihad at the time of recording. So if you add all of that up, you say that nothing is as advanced as people are implying with the Premier League clubs. And part of that is because until Benzema gets a green light, nobody's going to waste their time. So the next step is not the clubs coming to Al Ittihad. The next step is Benzema resolving the situation with Al Ittihad and determining whether he can genuinely be available on the market. And then we'll see whether any of these rumoured clubs actually come forwards. But until then, we need to be a little bit cautious. And I can guarantee you that none of the clubs being linked from the Premier League have yet, in terms of Ittihad talks or ministry talks, advanced anything yet. They also are understanding the situation to determine, is Benzema available on the market? And then they may be offered Benzema, and then they may approach the club, because he's a top class player and he's a good stopgap if he's available at the right price. But right now, people are making links where links do not exist. If that changes in the next few days, there'll be a lot of people that said, I told you so. But that's because there's 7 days left of the window and everyone has to make decisions and everyone has to be opportunistic. But I can promise you right now, at the time of recording, there's nothing as advanced with those Premier League clubs as people are implying.
And yeah, again, I haven't seen too many stories of sort of advancements. We obviously saw the Sammy McBell article yesterday that stated that Arsenal have been offered Benzema. We know that's obviously by the Benzema camp. As
that's
opposed
different,
to,
isn't it, though?
Yeah, absolutely. No, of course. And of course. And I think that's where people get this situation kind of confused. The Benzema camp, of course, they're offering him out to people because they're looking to secure a loan move away. And you've been very clear in this from day one that if, for instance, a Chelsea or an Arsenal says, yes, we're interested, they're going to try and bring it together. But it's one of those things for me that I look, what's your understanding of Arsenal saying no to that? Because that's the element of the story that Arsenal fans have got upset with, that Arsenal just saying, no, we're going to wait until the summer. We'd rather look for a defender or a midfield player now. Is that your understanding, that Arsenal are not really looking at a striker right now?
No, if they could get a striker right now that's the right fit, I think they would. But they got to think financially and who's available. And I still think Ivan Toney is the right kind of profile for them. So that might be summer. It could even be free agency 2025. Xerxes, another one that Arsenal have looked at as well. Again, it would be one for the summer. And there's some kind of confusion about the release clause there. But the club have said on record that it's only available to Bayern. So everyone else just has to face an open market. And if we take them at their word, that's accurate, which means it will be used as a yardstick valuation come summer, 40 million euros. But you can't just trigger that clause. And the clause isn't active now anyway, even if Arsenal wanted to. And it was applicable beyond Bayern, though that's the opposite of what the club have said. I think with saying no to Benzema, let's be very clear here. I can offer myself for a date with Taylor Swift, and Taylor Swift can never see that, can never respond to that. And it would obviously be her loss. But the offering means nothing. It literally doesn't mean a thing. It means that the camp are fueling interest. It means the agent are fueling interest. And it means they're telling the market this player might be available and see who bites. And they won't just be offering to one or two clubs. They'll be offering probably to 20 clubs across Europe that they think can afford it, because there's 7 days or so left of the window and they know that they need to move fast. So just because you get offered a player, and that is accurate to my understanding that Benzema's being offered around, I reported that yesterday, it doesn't mean that the club say, great, let's talk. It just means the club receive that, they know the terms on the market, and then we wait and see. But as of now, and again, now, I stress, and it's not sitting on the fence, it's the reality of a quick window. Things can change in the next few days. But as of now, Arsenal and Manchester United have not asked to engage in talks with the Benzema camp, nor have they started any talks with Al-Ittihad. That could change this afternoon, tomorrow, but as of now. And this is one of the challenges with transfers, that if someone goes out on a limb and says that it happened last week, then if it happens, they'll lay claim and say we were right all along. But these are the same people that told you that Newcastle opened talks with Calvin Phillips. They didn't. These are the same people that tell you Mbappe's already agreed to join Real Madrid. He hasn't. Will Mbappe join Real Madrid? Absolutely, there's a strong possibility. But if he joins and he agrees in February, then anyone that told you that he'd agreed in January is wrong. So we have to be cautious here. And again, as of now, Arsenal have not advanced anything with Benzema. Manchester United have not advanced anything with Benzema. If that changes in the next few days, I'll let you know. But Ittihad and the ministry have not received any offers at this point.
Can I ask you a question? Lewis put this in earlier. Louis Las Vegas, sorry, here said this window has been very sleepy. Maybe something to do with recent penalties to Everton and Forest. Clubs are double checking their books before they spend. And you know, there have been fans of Arsenal, for instance, who are saying the club isn't doing enough. The club isn't ambitious. The club's got hundreds of millions to spend, and they're not. I find these claims ludicrous, considering that nobody is really spending. A few clubs have bought some players, but Arsenal are not spending. Newcastle, City, United, Chelsea, nobody's really spending. Do you think the situations with the profit and sustainability regulations, the points deductions clubs have been sanctioned with, do you think that's all playing a part with this January window?
No, I just think that last January was so warped, as was the summer, and then the Saudi aspect inflated the market because there were 94 foreign signings there, that everyone has urgency and everyone feels like the last two windows, summer and January, have been so crazy that ultimately people have got this sort of false perception So yes, financial fair play for some clubs could have something to do with it. Others have done their revamps. Like Liverpool have revamped their midfield. They're calm about the situation. In the summer, they'll look for a centre-back. Why do they need to move? Arsenal did great business in the summer. It's a shame Timber's injured, but he was one. Havertz was one. Rice was one. They need a striker. If the striker's not available, why move in January? And Chelsea want an elite striker. If he's not available, why move in January? Wait for Osimhen in the summer. Arsenal might enter the race for Osimhen as well. Tony's not available now, might be available in the summer. So I think it's more, if the right targets are not available, maybe a little bit of profit and sustainability and financial fair play, coupled with the fact that January has always been a seller's market. So in the last, and this is Premier League only, in the last January window, there was £815 million spent by Premier League clubs. And I think that that is a summer-like spend. And now everybody's like, why is it not happening again? But if we look at patterns, every 3rd or 4th January, depending on circumstance and depending on the progression of a club and depending on average age, we get like a false spike in the market. It happened in 2010-11 when 220 odd million was spent, and that was seen as big. It happened in 2017-18 when 420 odd million was spent, almost 450 million maybe. And it happened again in 2022-2023 when 850 million was spent. But if you go back and look at other January spends, then I would say 50% of January windows collectively within the Premier League in the last 20 odd years, 50% of windows in January have had under 100 million spent. So it's all very well saying 850 million last January, why is it slow? But what about 2020, 2021 when 70 million was spent by Premier League clubs? What about 2011, 2012 when I think 60 million was spent? What about 2009-10? And what about most of the early parts of the 2000s when under 100 million was spent? What about 2018-2019 when less than 200 million was spent? So let's wait and see what the total spend is, because one signing can warp the market. One 60, 70 million signing can take collectively the Premier League above 100 million. But I'm not surprised. Of course, we need to adjust these numbers in the sense that 20 years ago, 70, 80 million might be now 150 million because the market's inflated. But the point is, go back and look at the January figures, and January is usually quiet. So quietness in January is the norm, but I just think it's been warped by such a crazy summer and a crazy January before that people just want signings. But signings aren't always good, because if you've had 2 or 3 good windows and it all goes according to plan, then why would you keep spending? You would slow down because you're delighted with what you've got. So not signing is a good thing if you're Liverpool. It's just not a good thing if you're Chelsea and Manchester United, because you've got need and financial constraints. But generally, if you get your summer right, then January should be quiet.
I totally get where you're coming from, and I didn't even think about the history of the January windows and looking at those spikes. It's a really great point, and I think the viewers should go and look into that themselves. I think as well, I personally do think PSR may be playing a little bit of a role with some clubs as well. Personally, we know Man United, the takeover or the partial takeover, I think is playing a part. I don't really want us making any big moves this month. At the same time, the one thing that I think some football fans frustrate me with is this notion of we need to go and get it done now. And I asked this question of someone on our Straight Facts, Dan Potts show yesterday, and he's entitled to his opinion. But I said to him, would you rather wait until the summer and get your number one midfield target, your number one striker target that your club desperately wants, or buy players that are potentially slightly below or way below the standard of those individuals now, in an attempt to try and win the league? And I get that some will say, no, just go and get it done now. But for me, it's an element of, I look at the way the great clubs have been run over the years when it comes to their transfers. They typically wait for their main targets, because football isn't always about the here and now and the one particular season that you're in. I saw someone comment earlier and they said, so Man United are writing off this season already, like it's bad mentality. This is the problem. Fix ourselves for the future. We can't be papering over cracks now. So if you're a team that has a midfield hole and you want it fixed, but your number one, number two, number three target that you think are of the level to dominate a midfield position in the Prem for 5, 6, 7 years, are not available now for one reason or another, why buy someone that you don't believe is anywhere near that standard just to plug a hole? Because what we do know with profit and sustainability is, and this is hopefully football fans learn to lose this phrase, if it's not my money, I don't care how much we spend. There is not a bottomless pit of money at any football club. Even if your owners are worth £500 billion, there's not a bottomless pit of money. So you have to be prudent and a little thrifty at times when it comes to these scenarios. So I do think there's multiple layers to why it's been a quiet month. But I certainly love what you said there, Ben, about the trends, really.
Just to add a little bit of breaking news, the statements come through from Manchester United. I don't know whether they've made it official, but it's certainly in my inbox. And that's that Anthony Martial is out for 10 weeks with what Manchester United term a groin complaint in a statement. I'm sure it will either be on their website or published shortly, but that's reached my inbox. Now, that's interesting because one, the agent said it was a hip issue. I suppose it can be connected. But two, being out for 10 weeks, that rules out any last minute bids. It confirms what the agent said, that he won't go until at the earliest the summer. But I wonder whether, even though he's obviously been frozen out, that might prompt Manchester United to pull the trigger on a last minute deal. You can argue it both ways, because is he missed if he wasn't playing anyway? But he's been injured. So maybe there isn't this problem with Ten Hag and the injury is the reason why he's not playing. So he's undergone successful surgery and he'll be out for 10 weeks, according to a statement. And maybe that will change the dynamic at Manchester United and force them to do something in the final few days of the window.
I love Anthony Martial. I'm not even trying to like dig him out. I'm just get him out of this club, man. Like, honestly, let's get him better. Let's get him out. It's crazy. Weghorst to return. maybe. But this is the thing. I'm not overly. Look, again, I want us to go and get Benzema in a short term. Personally, that's who I want, but that's maybe pie in the sky. Anyone's better than no one, in my opinion, just sometimes so you can bring somebody on as a sub, because what we don't want to do in this last half of the season is run other players into the ground, not being able to take them off, not being able to rest them, not being able to rotate. That's more detrimental than anything else. But yeah, poor Martial, that guy's body is genuinely made of biscuits in this day and age. There was another Arsenal story I wanted to speak to you about. There was a lot of reports yesterday in Spain that Zubimendi, Arsenal, Real Sociedad were very close, in their words, to agreeing a deal for a move in the summer, not for January, but a move in the summer. What's your understanding about Arsenal's interest in Zubimendi, and is there any possibility of a pre-agreement before the summer for the midfielder?
No, I don't think anything's agreed yet, but I think if you were to sort of rank Arsenal's two top midfield targets, even above the links with Onana, it would absolutely be Zubimendi and Douglas Luiz. I think those would be the two, if they just had carte blanche, that they would move for. And we know that they've tried for Zubimendi in the past. He's very happy at Sociedad. They're having an incredible season. So I would expect him not to pre-agree anything and to assess where he stands in the summer. But the Arsenal interest hasn't gone away, but there's also nothing pre-agreed to my knowledge. And obviously with Douglas Luiz, it's sort of a similar situation, only in the sense that Aston Villa are flying so high at the moment that it's going to be very difficult to prize him away as well. So I'd expect Arsenal to try for Zubimendi in the summer, but I am told pretty categorically that there's nothing that has been pre-agreed at this stage. And regarding the Onana situation, I know a lot of people wondered whether anything with Arsenal might be possible this window, and whether something cut price may materialise because of Everton's financial situation. Not necessarily my understanding either. And I know this sounds kind of doom and gloom, but again, it's an indication that Arsenal are not looking to drop money in this window at that magnitude, not for Luiz, not for Zubimendi, and not for Onana. But it doesn't mean that they're not concrete targets being worked on for the summer. But with Onana, Everton don't know where they stand at the moment. They are appealing robustly against their points deduction. Even with a new one, they might still stay up in the Premier League. And if you're Arsenal or other clubs, you might wait and see how that materialises. Because if they go down, like when Leicester went down, there's deals to be done. And if they stay up, the valuation probably doesn't change compared to what Everton might be considering now. But this isn't a 40 million deal. It might not even be a 50 million deal, because Everton paid 33 million to Lille for Onana. And therefore, they're going to be looking to get as close to double as they possibly can. So I would say 55 is maybe the minimum for Onana. And it wouldn't surprise me if Everton stay up, or given they're in the Premier League at the moment and it's mid-season, if they're looking at 60 million. So this is the kind of challenge right now. It's not a buyer's market. And anyone can sell you a dream, and anyone can tell you that your club is going to buy, and anyone can get you excited about a player. But wait and see in most cases with most of these links that are longer term links, what happens in January, because I think very little. But then pick it up against the summer, because you can be concretely working on a name like Zubimendi, knowing it's only for the summer and not for now. And that is the situation with Arsenal, but nothing is pre-agreed and nothing advanced at this point. But we know that they've liked Zubimendi for a long while. So we definitely can't rule that out as potentially happening. But the player is entirely focused on the club. He's delighted he stayed. He's delighted he's playing. He's delighted he's in the knockout stages of the Champions League. And he might be on course for a historic season. And a bit like Osimhen says with Napoli, even though he's kind of predetermined he wants to move to the Premier League in the summer, the players at the moment are not really thinking that far ahead. Osimhen knows his decision, so he's calm. And now he's focused on Napoli when he returns from AFCON. And Zubimendi may know what he wants to do in the summer, but again, he's calm. Why? Because he's not going to go in the next 7 days. So he's focused once again on Sociedad and the Champions League. And that's not what Arsenal fans want to hear, but it is the reality of the situation.
Yeah, I don't see that being a deal that's done for January. But again, you look at the other options that Arsenal are linked with. Zubimendi, in my opinion, is levels above them. And I know they want to sign now because they want to try and win the league now. But I wouldn't, if we just look at Onana, good player. But if the choices are, just say hypothetically, if the choices were Onana now or Zubimendi in the summer, I think if you're an Arsenal fan and you care about not just the here and now, you'll wait until the summer to get Zubimendi. And that for me, and that's not a disrespect to Onana, I just think Zubimendi is a different level of player compared to Onana. And that's where sometimes the need and want for instant gratification is required, if that makes sense. And I always remember me and my brothers, when we all turned 13, we all got the same birthday present. Obviously different years, we're all different ages. My brother got it. We got my dad bought us a ring, like a nice ring. And we got it was the first time ever we were given money for our birthdays. So my big brother went to, I don't know, JD or Foot Locker and bought some new trainers and new clothes. It was great. I did the same. When my brother below me, the year after me turned 13, he didn't want to wait until the Saturday for my mum or dad to take us down to the shopping centre and do it. So he went to the local shop and bought his clothes with it. But the selection wasn't as good. But in his panic to go and get it now, he ended up with some really rubbish trainers and some clothes that weren't very good. And sometimes if you that need for patience is key. So that's what I emphasize to Arsenal fans, United fans, Chelsea fans, is if you can't get the right target, wait. It will serve you better. Imagine where Liverpool would be if that summer where they didn't get Van Dijk. Imagine if they'd gone and signed Maguire instead and hadn't waited, as an example. Wait, be patient. It, generally speaking, works out to be a lot better. There was a super chat that came in here from AJ. He says, "Hi, Ben. Any outgoings from Arsenal?"
Yeah, I think they'd like to get outgoings, that's for sure. It's just that it can be quite challenging. Cedric and El Neni are probably the two that they would like to get done. With Cedric, we know there's been interest from Turkey. With El Neni, it's a little bit harder because he's a free agent in the summer. So some of the Saudi clubs, for example, and Turkish ones are contemplating just pre-agreeing something and then utilizing free agency, because it's obviously going to be cheaper unless Arsenal just decide that they want to offload and not take a fee. So that presents a little bit of an opportunity for Arsenal if they're flexible and they just want to clear the wage space and the squad space ultimately. But El Neni's not a given. I think that there's a fair chance that Cedric gets done between now and the end of the window. And obviously Emil Smith-Rowe's been the big kind of talking point at Arsenal, along with Nketiah. With Nketiah, as I revealed a few weeks back, the Palace interest is genuine, but Arsenal's position is that they don't want to sell and they value him as a squad player, and depth is going to be too important to Arsenal in the second half of the season. A lot will depend on, is there anyone out there striker-wise that Arsenal genuinely want right now? And if so, that could change the situation with Nketiah. But if Palace come calling, even though there's a reasonably clear valuation on Nketiah of somewhere in the region of 35 million, I would expect bids to be rejected because Arteta wants to keep Nketiah. So unless anyone comes in, that won't be an outgoing as far as I'm told. With Smith Rowe, we know that West Ham have tried and had a loan rejected. Aston Villa interest is still there as well. But all indications are that, again, Arsenal want the depth. Arsenal want to keep the player. The player wants to fight for his place. So something dramatic will have to change there. And also, it would have to be a big offer and a permanent offer if anything is to change as far as Smith Rowe is concerned. So there might be some Arsenal outgoings, but as I've outlined, there's those 4 names there, and each of them have their complications.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally get where you're coming from there. And I'm not throwing shade on my brother's style, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. He just bought a pair of trainers. And this was in an era where Reebok Classics were the ones. You'll remember that. Ben, similar age to me. And he just bought an old janky pair because the shop was an average sports shop. And he was then gutted when he was getting teased. And I told him, if he'd have waited till Saturday, we'd have gone down to Selborne Walk, which was in Walthamstow, gone to JD and got a nice pair. But he didn't listen. He rushed. Don't rush. What is it they say? Like, there's a saying someone put in here, and it really does make sense. That's it. Spend cheap, pay twice. I like that. It's really good, and that's what can happen to a lot of football teams. Let's have a little look at some more of these comments that have come through. This is from JC. He says, Terry, can you ask Ben, will Chelsea be able to sell some players in this last week? How close are they? Which players could go?
Yeah, we know about Amanda Broja. That could still be one to watch. There's a few clubs interested, but the club valuation and Chelsea's valuation are miles apart. So Chelsea would either have to do what they did with Maatsen and decide they're going to loan him with an option, or they'd have to come down on their obligation or their permanent price to, I'd say, 30, 35 million. And, people will kind of wonder why their clubs are not moving at that number. But if you look at Fulham, for example, one of the clubs interested, if Fulham paid 35 million, I think that's a club record for Fulham. So this is not small money to some of the suitors interested, but this notion Chelsea are going to get 50 or 60 million or a yard-sticking Broja against the Rasmus Højlund fee is a nice narrative, and it sparks, I suppose, interest. And it makes it clear that Broja is for sale at the right price, but Chelsea are not going to get 60 million for Broja, 50 million for Broja. But I think around that 30, 35 mark, something might be possible because there is a high volume of interest. And if not, Chelsea are going to have to determine whether they'd be prepared to do a loan with an option instead. But unless Chelsea bring in a striker, I'm not sure it would go down very well with the Chelsea fan base or Pochettino if they only loan Broja, didn't get any guaranteed financial fee other than the loan fee and the wages, and then were without an established striker until Jackson returns from AFCON. So Broja obviously started the game in the League Cup final and semi-final, I should say, second leg against Middlesbrough. And I still think that there's a little bit of a difference of opinion between Pochettino, who would like to keep Broja for now unless someone comes in, and the Chelsea hierarchy, who are looking for sales. Trevor Chalobah, we might see a late offer for him. But again, the player will sit tight. If not, he'll only move for the right opportunity, as he showed when he rejected Nottingham Forest over the summer period. We know Conor Gallagher could be sold for the right price, but I don't see Spurs matching that 60 million that Chelsea are looking for all in, 45 million guaranteed plus add-ons, which means that Chelsea are in a position where they would like an outgoing in the next 7 days, maybe even 2 outgoings, but they're going to have to come down on some of their valuations. Otherwise, they might find that some of these players they're willing to or need to shift are not guaranteed to exit. And any clubs interested are going to wait. They're going to wait until the final few days of the window. It might be the same for Newcastle. They're going to put pressure on a Chelsea or a Newcastle to sell because it's clear in the market that they need to sell. And you do that by swooping in a bit later and basically giving a kind of take it or leave it type offer and then seeing whether it's feasible. And the advantage with Broja is that the clubs involved don't really need to play too many games, because the lower end of the valuation for Broja and the lower end of the valuation for Conor Gallagher is the maximum genuinely these clubs are prepared to pay. Spurs don't want to pay more than 35-40 million for Gallagher, and Wolves and Fulham want a loan for Broja, maybe with an option, maybe with an obligation, but all in, they don't want to go above 35 million. West Ham's historical offer for Broja was 33 million, and Aston Villa are interested but haven't really advanced it to date. So you got 4 suitors that don't value Broja above 35 million, and maybe they're willing to go up $1 million or 2, but they're not willing to go up 30 million or 20 million, which means that they may make a late offer for Broja of 30 million. And if it's rejected, they'll say, fine, it was as high as we were prepared to go anyway. So I think that's why we've had a lull in Broja. And let's see now whether it picks up this week.
Thank you. This here from Olu, one of our members, says, morning, guys. Is it true that Sir Jim Ratcliffe wants Southgate to replace Ten Hag after the Euros to have an English manager?
No. End of answer. Shortest answer I've ever given. I mean, there's no determination on Ten Hag. I can't repeat that enough times. If Ten Hag goes, there will be a series of candidates. Southgate's not available in the market at this point because he obviously is looking to stay with England for the 2026 World Cup. If that changes, it will be because Southgate hasn't succeeded at Euro 2024. And then what is his stock? He doesn't have the dressing room experience at a club like Manchester United, the domestic experience in years gone by, because he's been at England for quite some time. Nobody's saying that Manchester United need an English manager. Manchester United need the right manager. And were they to get rid of Ten Hag, they will think long and hard. And look at Omar Berrada and how they've gone about that. They'll be discreet, they'll be private, and they'll probably surprise us with the appointment. So I don't think we can say anybody. People are talking about Graham Potter. People are talking about Zinedine Zidane. People are talking about, I don't know, bring Mourinho back just because he's a free agent. At this point, it's nonsense because they have not made a determination yet about Erik Ten Hag.
And there is this really weird group of people online that are pushing this notion that because Sir Jim is English, he only wants a British core and British people running the club. I love the fact that 2 of his appointments so far on the board, and Blanc is French, and Omar Berrada, as far as I know, is born in French to Moroccan parents. It's about as Brexit as you can get, isn't it? 2 French people, one of them which is born to Moroccan parents. You're very Brexit. But some people like to push that notion. It's very weird to me. Very, very strange indeed. Yeah, Southgate, in my personal opinion, won't be the Man United manager. Moving forward, Stuart here with a super chat and a question. Thank you, Stuart. He says, Ben, is there a point that clubs are making by not buying to downsize the overall inflated market created by the likes of Chelsea, who buy high and sell off loads to ease as Newcastle do? Do you think clubs are making, Stuart here, do you think clubs are making a statement by not buying in January?
No, I don't think so. I think you don't think about that bigger picture. You think about your own finances and you think about what you need. You're not trying to downsize the market, because if you do that, then it will immediately reinflate, because the big clubs will say, great, the market's cheaper, we're going to spend more, and then numbers will go up again. So you can't downsize the market by almost doing no business out of a strategy or a protest. And if the market goes lower, it's good news for the big clubs, which means they'll spend more and more, and then there'll be more demand, and then the prices will go back up again. And this is the kind of challenge. So I think that the point has come where clubs either can't spend, financially speaking, or just don't have the need. And we've seen a flurry of revamps at the same time. So straight after those revamps, a quiet January is to be expected in the Premier League anyway. You know, Arsenal did their business, big business. So why would they follow that up with another big January? Chelsea had a big January into a big summer. So again, why, financially speaking, strategically speaking, from a football perspective, would they again choose to spend? They're waiting for the summer. And then add to that the fact that the right targets are not necessarily available. And I think, as I said before, this is why we've had a quiet January.
Totally makes sense. Now, Ben, I know you've got to shoot, my friend. I know you've got some other commitments today. I'm going to stay live for a little bit with the viewers. Always a pleasure, my friend, to speak transfers and everything with you. And we'll chat again soon, mate.
Yeah, I'll look forward to it. Enjoy the final week or so of the window, everyone.
Will do. Cheers, Ben. Thank you very much, my man. Thank you very much indeed. Now, viewers, make sure like buttons are hit. Make sure you are subscribing. I'm going to go through some more of your comments that have come through. I don't want to ignore these. Yo, Terry, are Arsenal looking scary with Saka, Jesus, and Nelly? For a Man United fan, yeah. But maybe for City and Liverpool fans, not so much. Kate also said earlier, do we think Spurs will bring in any further signings? I actually asked Ben this. I DM'd it to him. And he said nothing's really on the cards right now. The Gallagher situation could rear its head if the money was right. Maradon, my guy here, says Terry picks and choose what to respond to. Be a man, and answer me about your Bruno and KDB comparison. I stand by the comparison when I made it. When Bruno came to this league, that first 2 to 2.5 years, he was every bit as good as any player in the Premier League. But as with every single Manchester United player, and I stated this would be the case if you go back and watch the content from back then, that he will eventually get dragged down with everybody else to a lower standard because the club is poisonous. But of course, I stand by what I said at that moment in time, because the guy drove our club forward. He had by the way, he had one season in that period. In that particular season, he scored and created more goals combined than any other midfield player in the history of English football for a single season. So I stand by everything I said back then. The same as when we signed Paul Pogba, I thought he was one of the best midfield players in the world. That opinion today doesn't stand true. He's not today one of the best midfielders in the world, but he was at the time. So yes, Maradona, I stand by it. It's not something I'm embarrassed by. It's something I stand up to. But the world and the situation has changed now. It's as simple as that. Scored like 10 penalties that season. Yeah, and the person that held that record before him also scored a number of penalties that season. And penalties are goals. Imagine you discount that. Terry, where do you see United in 10 years? It all depends on how this genuine rebuild goes. Depends who we bring in, how well structured we are. Do we stick to a plan? But if we're run well, so let's just say we're run 90% as well as Bayern Munich, as Man City, as Liverpool, as Brighton, as all these teams, pound for pound, we're talking here. Over the next 10 years, if Man United, with our money, with our resources, are run as well as those clubs, with great football decision makers in place, we will win. We will win a couple of major trophies in that time. The reason I'm not going to say more is we have no idea how good everybody else is going to be, because that also plays a part. If you've got 4 or 5 teams, all of a Liverpool and Man City level, it's unlikely that one team in that period is going to win everything or win the majority of those trophies if they're all of similar levels. There's only 1 or 2 teams at that level. Generally, you get a team like Liverpool in the 70s and 80s, United in the 90s and 90s, and City now that dominates. So it really depends. But we will win major trophies if we're run well, as per other clubs. I'm very, very confident about that indeed. Then you said a month ago him and Trashford should be sold. Things change. Of course things change. And again, Maradona, you're trying to kind of catch me out here. And you do this on every show. And this is why when you were crying earlier about you being called a moron, you're always calling me out. You've called me names. You call other people in the chat names. And if you can't give it, if you can't take it, don't give it. That's a bitch move. Now, for me, the reason I've said they've got to go is not that I think it would directly improve us because they're bad players, but I think I want to remove a lot of the infighting amongst fans, because I believe the way fans behave is an important part at a club. And I believe that moving them on is a great way for us to move forward. But equally, I don't think just getting rid of them is a solution. The same as I didn't think getting rid of Martial and Pogba would be the solution. The same as just sacking Ten Hag won't be. You know what I've said, Maradon. You watch every minute of every show that I do, but yet you sort of call out things that I haven't even said. But I'll answer you because I'm being a man. I'm being a man. He does like beefing. He really loves me, and he probably wishes he was me. Do you know what I'm saying? Hopefully next season, United versus Liverpool rivalry. Do you know what, Phil? Man United versus Liverpool as the best 2 teams in England as a rivalry is a dream of mine. It's never happened. We've never been the top 2 teams in England for a prolonged period of time together. Whenever either of us has been brilliant, the other one has always been slightly off the pace. So it would be an amazing thing to see and to kind of witness and sort of go through, really. It'd be amazing to see. Terry, would you sell Rashi in the summer? Big up the show. Potentially, yes. I mean, it's as much as I rate Rashford as a player, I think that he is just like with many others before him. I think the club has taken its toll on him. If you go back and watch the early footage of him, and even last year, like it had these peaks and troughs now. You go back and watch the footage of Bruno when he first arrived, just different players. And I want us to move on. I want us to start afresh. And I think there needs to be some sacrificial lambs in that. So, yeah, it's as simple and as straightforward as that. You know it's true. You know it's true. And you know what it is? Like Twisted Bubba here said, Maradon, Terry is too smart for us, bro. It's not about being too smart for anybody. I don't believe I know everything. Never have done, never will do. But like all of you, I think my opinions are right. But if you give me a good opinion, I'm like, that's a great point. I always say it. It's as simple as that. Thank you, Andrew, for tuning in, mate. I really do appreciate that. I really do. Terry, how about your winning the league shout? Yeah, you need to remind me what that shout was and contextualize it for me. For instance, when Man United won the Carabao Cup last season, I did state that Man United under Ten Hag could go on to bigger and better things and maybe even challenge and win the league this year. But if you leave out the element of if the Glazers sell and the new owners are in time, so if you leave that part of the statement out, it sounds like something to banter me on. But my point was, if we get new owners start doing what I'm praising now of bringing in the right infrastructure, the right board, the right sporting directors, I believe we could have carried on progressing. But we now fast forward 10, nearly 11 months. We've actually gone backwards in that time because the rot hadn't been removed. So again, I need you to clarify what I said, when I said it, and how I said it. And he says, and this is what Maradon the moron does. He says, rewording. It's not rewording. It's finishing the sentence. It's finishing the sentence. It's like finishing the sentence. It's crazy. It's like, imagine you clip half a little sentence and go, that's what someone said. You know, it isn't true, moron. Culture says, love this show, Terry. You're always honest and true to your word. I am always honest and true to my word. And if I get something wrong, I say I get it wrong. It's really not a big deal. But what I won't ever do is sit there and say I got something wrong if it's being taken out of context. It's crazy to me. And we all get things wrong. We all get things right. It's the nature of it. Don't worry, people. McTominay will survive again. He could, Simon. He genuinely could survive again. He really, really could. He really, really could. Terence, do you think Arsenal have more of a chance of winning the Champions League than Premier League? The Champions League is the hardest cup competition in the world. It's very hard to win. Some will say it's harder to win than the Premier League. Some will say it's easier to win. And I think there's context to that. It depends on who you draw. Are you home or away first leg? So say like you're say from the quarterfinals onwards. Say you have the first leg at home 3 times on the bounce, and your quarterfinals is against Real Madrid, and your semi-final was against Manchester City, and your final was against Bayern Munich. You could argue that's harder to win than the Premier League based on the context of that season in the league. But say you get Porto, and then you get, I don't even know, left in it. Then you get Sociedad still in it. They might have been in the Europa League. I'd have to go and look. But say you get some relatively easier draws right to the final, then you could argue it's easier. So it really does depend. But generally speaking, I'm going to say more chance. It's hard because Arsenal never won the Champions League. Is the pedigree there? I would say slightly better chance winning the Champions League than Premier League. What do the bookmakers say? Let's have a look at what the bookmakers say. Odds to win the UCL. All right, let's have a little look. So, I just want outright winners. You mugs. I just want outright winners. Where are we at? It's just hang on, out. Okay. Here we go. Right, I found it here. So Arsenal are currently 11-2 or 6-1 to do that. Odds to win EPL. See, they're down as 7 or 8-1 to win the Premier League. So according to the odds on this, the odds state that it's slightly easier to win the Champions League. But this is what happens a lot. This will get polarized, Aaron. So people will go, no, I think the Champions League's easier, or I think the Premier League's harder. It's the difference is very small. So it becomes an argument that's not really worthwhile having. You're talking, in Arsenal's case, 6-1 to 7-1, which is a very slight fractional difference, very small, minuscule difference. So, yeah, it is what it is. And then context needs to be applied. Terry, can Man United still make the top four? Mathematically, yes. Likelihood low due to how much better the teams above us are at this moment in time. But that's my personal opinion. When you say it's clearly easier to win, again, you're over-egging it and you're being too hyperbolic with that statement because it isn't clearly easier. Maradon's do a top six show. Listen, Maradon, I will pay you a fee of £200 to appear on the show with the camera turned on to give your opinions, mate. I'd love to do it. I'll pay you a fee. £200 I'll pay you to come on and do it. If you don't want the money personally, we'll donate it to charity. Will you show your face? Will you show your face? Let me know. You could argue that the Champions League is less competitive. I think I know where you're coming from with that. At the same time, though, one-off games are interesting. If Arsenal took on Middlesbrough in a one-on-one league where they played each other 10 times, and the one that Arsenal would probably win 9 to 10 times out of 10. But it was that one-off game where Borough might do it. But with knockout football, that one-off game could come in the first match. Do you get where I'm coming from? So when it's knockout football, that one-off game can kill you. Now, if it was against Middlesbrough, the second leg, you'd knock them out. But if you're up against a really good team and you have that one-off game where you just have a bad day and have a brilliant day and you get beat 3-0, you're pretty much out. Where in the league, you can have that bad day and still win. So that's where the less competitiveness, if you want to believe that's true, we'll sit in your hypothetical world right now. That's where the competitiveness is counterbalanced. One bad moment can lead to you being out. One bad day. You could theoretically get beat 15-0 in a game in the Prem and still win it. Theoretically. Where you could never lose by 3 or 4 goals in the Champions League game, and the likelihood of you staying in is exceedingly low. So, yes, I wouldn't say it's less competitive. I know where you're coming from. I think what you mean is you have to win less games to win it compared to the Prem. I think that's where you're coming from. So I'm not going to scrutinize your wording. Very true. Yeah, I knew what you meant. And sometimes in life, we don't need to scrutinize the words. We have to understand where somebody's coming from as opposed to the actual words that they use. I think that's really, really important. It really is. Lies about clubs, fan bases, and has agendas to get managers sacked. Oh, you mean me, Theo? When you say I've got like lies, and you said earlier I don't say nothing nice about Liverpool. If you actually watch my recent Liverpool videos, I've been very complimentary of Liverpool. Spoke about how fantastic, how incredible, how inevitable, how clinical, and how dangerous you are. And in fact, you're only a handful more points away of getting in front of City before I think you're favourites to win the league. And to say that all I do is lie about other clubs or say nasty things about other clubs, this is a ball-faced lie from yourself, my friend. The irony is you're saying I'm a liar in a statement that's lying about me. It's absolutely crazy. Maradon won't show up, though, because Maradon's a troll. He also, it might have been him. No, somebody else that said they're like in their 70s. It wasn't him, to be fair, who said that. But yeah, some people go, oh, I'm in my 70s. I bet you're not. He says facts. Terry, do you think United is worth more at the top of the Premier League than the league itself? No, because the league's obviously worth more if you were to add it up, because it's the valuation essentially of all those clubs and their pawn power together. So no, Man United are not worth it. But if Man United went out of business, it would have a huge and detrimental effect upon the valuation of the Premier League. Man United are the biggest draw. Man United get the most views. Man United are the most famous. So, and that fame, that Hollywood attraction of Man United is worth huge amounts of money. Liverpool are up there as well, of course. Arsenal are up there. Chelsea are up there with that draw. They're hugely important to like Man United and Liverpool especially. You could throw Arsenal into the mix, but Man United and Liverpool are the two most important clubs to the pyramid of English football from a financial standpoint, in my opinion. And yes, Maradon will go MIA. Listen, I'll make an offer. I'll make a £500 donation to charity if Maradon does a top 6 show with us and shows his face. £500 donation to charity. There we go. There we go. Listen, I want to thank you all for tuning in today. Remember to download Match Bingo before you go. It is an amazing and fun game. So it's an amazing game during football matches. Very cheap to play. It's £2 per card. But there are lots of free cards as well. And if you sign up today, you get 10 free bingo cards every month for the rest of the season. And essentially, when you're watching games, every free kick, every corner, every throw-in, every substitution could help you win. And if you're first to complete a line, a second line, or get a full house, just like in normal bingo, you win money. It's very cheap, as I say, at £2 a pop. You do have to be over the age of 18, and you have to be in the UK to play it. But for me, I love buying a few bingo cards for every game that's available and just kind of having it on while I'm watching a football match, especially for games I'm not really invested in. It makes them so much more exciting. And you can also win a little bit of money as well. But you can't really lose big either because it's £2 a card. But bet responsibly as always. Give Match Bingo a go. Scan that QR code on the screen right now. If indeed that's what you fancied. If you don't and it's not your bag, absolutely fine. No pressure whatsoever. Listen, people, until next time, look after yourselves. Take care of yourselves. To all the super chatters, you're amazing. To everyone who's hit the like button, I love you to bits. To my trolls and the people that give me stick every show, big love. I respect you all dearly. But remember, if you're going to give it, you got to be able to take it. If you can't take it, keep your mouth closed. Until next time, take care. Goodbye. God bless. We'll see you, by the way, 3:30. Make sure you're back here. Straight Facts with